In recent months around the Western world, particularly in Europe, you may have noticed an outpouring of nationalistic behaviour, including protests and increased flying of flags, in an apparent reaction to illegal immigration, multiculturalism, and limited government policies that effectively facilitate integration of newcomers. The media would certainly have us believe that a significant social crisis is unfolding. And of course, it would be simplistic to exclusively associate this reaction with far right-wing populist rhetoric about sovereignty, the protection of national identity, and imperialist notions of superiority over others. But when you hear moderate people who aren't overtly racist or obviously indoctrinated with right-wing ideology express genuine concerns, there's clearly a complicated issue that requires a multi-layered, balanced and long-term response centered on common values that recognizes the humanity of all parties involved, which doesn't seem to be at the heart of current political discourse. Now, the intention of this video is not to delve into the weeds of that complex and nuanced issue and propose political solutions. Rather, I'd prefer to zoom out a little and look at it from a slightly broader, globalized and perhaps more philosophical perspective, and also share my personal story. Well, the idea of the nation state and nationalism is really only a couple of 100 years old. It's clear and obvious that nations do provide systems of governance, law, and citizenship. They instill a sense of national identity through symbols, flags, and narratives that give people a sense of security and belonging. Plus, there are always long histories of previous generations who fought and suffered to achieve what is available today. I'd be naive to not recognize that nations organize the world and that national identity helps people make sense of the world. However, the thing about nations is that they are ultimately human inventions. Borders are simply lines on a map, legacies often related to colonialism, wars, and accidents of history. And they do indeed help organize society, but they also most certainly contribute to dividing it. Critically, they delineate groups, turning us and them into permanent categories. They tell us who belongs and who doesn't, i.e., they make belonging conditional. And people often say we're conditioned by our conditions, and that the experiences we have growing up as children directly shape the adults we become, that we're all connected to the people, culture, and national identity of the place we grew up. But what happens for people who grow up in more than one place, in more than one country? What happens when people grow up across, among, or between multiple countries and cultures? The fact is, millions of people already live beyond nationally constructed boundaries, such as migrants, refugees, expatriates, and third culture kids, that is, children who spend a significant part of their developmental years outside their parents' culture or passport country, i.e., people who carry multiple identities at once, people with multiple passports or people with none. Lives that prove that identity doesn't always neatly fit inside borders. For me, I grew up as a third culture kid. I was born in the small Pacific island country of Fiji to an indigenous Fijian father and a third generation European New Zealander mother. I grew up as a mixed race kid in post-independence Fiji, speaking English as my mother tongue and only learning the native Fijian language colloquially through my interactions with my Fijian relatives. For those who don't know, Fiji is a small tropical island nation in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with a population of less than 1 million people, made up of indigenous Fijians, ethnically Indian Fijians, and various other communities from different cultural backgrounds, including other Pacific Islanders, Chinese, and Europeans. In addition to Fiji, I've also lived in Australia and New Zealand, spent most of my formative years in England and Belgium in Europe, and currently live in Qatar in the Middle East. And every country has played a part in shaping the person I am today. I've had to adapt to new cultures, languages, religions, customs, and cultural expectations. Growing up, I used to joke that I was an international foreigner because I didn't fit in anywhere. If people asked, "Where are you from?" my answer would largely depend on who I was talking to. In most cases, I'd say I was from Fiji, but if I was sure they'd never heard of Fiji, I'd just say I was from New Zealand. And if I wanted to cut it short, I'd even say I was from England because most people assumed I was due to my accent. For those of us who have grown up across cultures, that question can be a difficult one to answer. And growing up cross-culturally also meant that my accent has always adapted to the person I'm speaking with. While it's mostly subconscious, I've been conditioned to speak to be understood. So while I'm perfectly comfortable speaking English with received pronunciation at work, I can just as easily slip into broken or pidgin English when conversing with a taxi driver in downtown Suva, or even convert to French in Francophone countries. So my cultural identity has never been a straightforward given. Because I've never really spoken my native Fijian language, I've always felt a degree of imposter syndrome about my Fijian heritage. That's no reflection of how Fijians, like my relatives, regard me. They've always seen me as a Fijian. In Fiji, if you have one drop of Fijian blood, you're Fijian and embraced as such. But that's not even mentioning my New Zealand heritage, of which I most definitely feel like an imposter. While I hold a New Zealand passport, which I consider a blessing that I'm extremely grateful for, I didn't grow up in New Zealand. So I don't have that lived experience to really identify with the culture and character of Kiwis. So for people like me, national identity feels more like a choice rather than a fixed truth. It's situational and it can shift. And in my mind, that raises important questions like, if so many of us are already living beyond borders, why do people still cling to the idea that where we're from is the most important thing about who we are? And is there a different way to understand who we are, as humans first and citizens second? Because if we zoom out a little, say from a bird's eye view looking down on the world, you wouldn't see these imaginary lines we call borders, our passports, our flags. You'd just see us like ants on the surface of the planet, indistinguishable from each other. So what is left when you strip away all those superficial differences and only have what makes us human? Well, you'd see that we are in fact more similar than we are different. We all experience joy and heartbreak. We all laugh when we're happy, cry when we're sad, grieve loss and feel pain. We all desire to love and be loved, to live in peace, prosperity and dignity and not worry about money all the time. We all want the best for our children, and we want them to be safe and have a bright future. And we all have frustrations, fears and worries. We all have baggage and insecurities and are flawed in our own unique, complex and individual ways. It's so very easy to lose perspective on how small the differences between us actually are. Growing up across multiple countries made me see these common threads more clearly. Being a global nomad exposed me to a wide variety of different people, religions, and languages. That helped me view the world through an open-minded lens, tolerant of cultural differences, which I honestly believe served to elevate my emotional intelligence. Not growing up in a single country required me to form my identity without any reference to ethnocentric bias or sense of cultural superiority, which ultimately helped me understand that my identity truly transcends geographic and cultural barriers. Fundamentally, rather than focus on my rootlessness, I developed a strong sense of being a global citizen, a sense that we don't have to belong to a single country. We can belong to the human species, the planet, and each other. That we can still be proud of our roots, culture, and connection to our land, but not be exclusively defined by them. And at the same time, we can embrace diversity and choose to see people from different countries as fellow humans first, before seeing them as foreigners. In a culturally blended and sometimes overwhelming world facing multiple global crises like climate change, migration, and inequality, global citizenship really is a survival skill, dare I say a superpower. Our ability to collaborate as humans, not just as members of separate nations, might just decide what kind of future we get. I can't help imagining a fantasy scenario that I'd ask you to temporarily suspend reality to contemplate. Imagine we woke up tomorrow and governments and the media worldwide revealed that aliens are in fact real, that they've been visiting us for millennia and already walk among us. And consequently, those alien species shapeshift back into their own original physical forms. Imagine the mental gymnastics we would have to perform to make sense of this new reality. And moreover, how ridiculous the idea of nations defined by arbitrary lines on maps that divide us as humans would become. Even the idea of differentiating humans based on race and ethnicity would feasibly become obsolete. I honestly believe that if we could see ourselves first as humans before anything else, maybe we could start building a future where cooperation matters more than competition, where we could stop possessively fighting over borders and national identity and rather start working together on what really matters for our collective mutual benefit. Now, of course, people will say I'm being idealistic and simplistic, that this is too big of an issue to change, an immovable mountain as it were, that there's no real tangible alternative. But I know there's an alternative because I embody it. And the first step of moving a mountain is to acknowledge that there's a mountain to move in the first place. Then, the next step would be for single individuals to take the first step of their own journey towards being global citizens that are more compassionate and empathetic towards others. Like, the next time you catch yourself thinking in terms of us and them, stop and ask yourself, what do we share? Or actually taking the time to listen to someone from a different country or culture and asking them about their story. Because lots of small individual steps like that would constitute a large collective step for humanity. And that's exactly what it takes to build momentum, to begin a current of meaningful, sustained change. Ultimately, it all starts with our own individual perspective, how we choose to see the world. And despite all external influences, that is a choice we're all individually in control of. We all have the choice to adopt either a narrow nationalistic perspective or a broader, inclusive, globalized worldview. We can choose to do something, or we can choose to do nothing. So what do you choose? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. For now, I'd like to thank you for watching this episode. Please feel free to share the video with anyone it might resonate with. And if you enjoyed it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again soon.